Hi everyone, welcome to the Unnecessary Nonsense Podcast YouTube channel. So, midweek video can only mean one thing: something has happened, and not surprisingly, based on the ominous rumblings from last week, Tom Dundon has decided to exercise his option as basically, in effect, folded the Alliance of American Football. So it's not officially folded, they're going to discontinue operations based on the reports that are out, and I'll include links in the description to a couple of articles so that you can read it for yourself. You don't just have to rely on me. But the short version of it is that, in effect, discontinuing operations is kind of a precursor to actually folding the league. Now, obviously, that's pretty disappointing. I've been an advocate of the league, and obviously I've made a number of videos on this channel. I was going to make a Week 8, looking forward to Week 9 video, but given the state of it, I decided to kind of hold back and wait because we felt that a decision was going to be made soon. And there was no point in talking about Week 9 games if there's going to be no Week 9. Obviously, this is really disappointing, especially given that we were only there were only 2 weeks left in the regular season, and then it would have been 2 weeks of playoffs with the championship game. And there were some upcoming network games on the CBS network, and I believe also TBS or TNT. I forget which one it was. But the truth is, it's not surprising given the way that Tom Dundon has been approaching this the last couple of weeks, and especially given his comments last week. But at the same time, it's a bit perplexing. And we kind of talked about that a little bit on the podcast. So this channel is kind of an offshoot of the podcast where we can kind of talk about different things. But it's perplexing because up until this point, reportedly, and when I talk about any dollar figures right now, everything is reported. I don't have the balance sheet in front of me. I can't confirm that for you. But reportedly, he spent $70 million so far, and the expectation would have been that it would have cost about another $20 million to finish off the season. Spoiler short version, I think he should have done it. Not because anyone likes to lose money. Even if you're a billionaire, you don't want to lose money. But realistically, there was almost no way. It felt a lot like Tom Dundon was looking for an out, or it was kind of a weird power play that really wasn't going to work because the Players Association wasn't going to simply concede. We outlined kind of the reasons why on the podcast, but I'll give you the short version. The reason why they wouldn't concede is because, number one, there is the XFL next year, so they'd have to see what they're going to do. Number two, I don't think from an antitrust legislation standpoint, I don't think they could just give exclusive rights to the Alliance of American Football to practice roster players. And then number three, the most logical reason of all from the Players Association standpoint is, why would you agree to anything when you haven't even seen them finish out a season? You haven't even seen kind of what the reception would be towards the end. And also, you've got to work out logistics. If a player gets hurt on the Alliance, playing for an Alliance team, are they covered? Are they insured? What happens to, their earning power because they can't play on an NFL roster either? Any kind of an agreement, even a two-way agreement that they could potentially be interested in looking into, isn't going to happen overnight. Lawyers would have to look at it. They'd have to come to some kind of an agreement with the NFL. All those things could happen, but a lot of the Alliance's original thinking. Now, we're going to compare what they were originally selling and thinking versus Tom Dundon's vision. So the reality is the original vision was to operate for multiple seasons. You're playing kind of a long game because you have to expect, if you're starting up a sports league from scratch, and I am going to talk about the XFL a little bit in this conversation as well. That'll be in the back end of the video. But first, let's talk about the Alliance, what happened here. But the short version of it is, even if you were incredibly optimistic, even if the first season had gone about as well as it could have, there's still no reason for the Players Association to come to a deal to you before the end of the first season. They would have wanted to see it play out, understand, okay, you're in for the long haul, fair enough, and you kind of work things out from there. But without that, you had no leverage. So realistically, Tom Dundon's threat, if we don't get Player Association, agreement, we're not going to be able to continue the season, isn't really much of a threat from the Players Association standpoint. It doesn't mean anything to them. From a practical standpoint, they would prefer to have more options for their players, but that they still have to work out all those details before they even consider any kind of an agreement. So from that standpoint, I get the Players Association side of it. I don't understand Tom Dundon's, angle on this. Again, if it's 20 million or 30 million or whatever, you went in with a big splash saying you were going to be up to $250 million towards ensuring the viability of the league in the long run. As a business person, coming off of this, why would you ever trust Tom Dundon with anything? So, I kind of feel bad for the Carolina Hurricanes fans. You got to wonder if he doesn't like something there, if he would just ditch that team too. Because now you have to question almost everything because of the way Tom Dundon has approached this. If you didn't want to spend the money in the first place, then you didn't have to. He came in later after the fact, and nobody was putting a gun to his head saying, save the league, so to speak. So from that standpoint, I don't feel bad for Tom Dundon losing some money. Also, the fact that he's lost the money is a self-inflicted wound because this isn't like the XFL folding the first time, where they still had the willingness to go to a second season, but the ratings had dropped so far and the interest had waned so much that the network partners dropped them. The Alliance still had network partners. In fact, was playing a network game, as I mentioned earlier. They were going to have a network game this week coming up. So you cut it off at the knees before you even get to that point. You cut it off at the knees before you get to a championship game that was going to be had in the Dallas Cowboys facility in Fresco, Texas. So you've got all these things going on that seemingly would give you some momentum potentially into a second season, and that's when you decide to drop it. Or maybe if you're Tom Dundon, you could have finished the season out, seen if there was another investor who was willing to buy out some of it and give you some of your money back, and then kind of back away into the background. Because at that point, Tom Dundon was calling all the shots. Bill Polian and Charlie Ebersol, from reports, were in disagreement with this course of action, obviously. It's embarrassing for them as well. They started the league with all this promise, and now it's kind of fallen apart. But at the end of the day, it was Tom Dundon's call. As soon as he became the majority shareholder, he was able to decide when to do this. It's a bad look for him because, hundreds or even 1,000 people have lost their jobs. The football players are going to have to find somewhere else to go, but also the staff working at all the teams and all that. And like I said, when I talk about the XFL piece in a second, it isn't necessarily a boon for the XFL. It would seem so on the surface, but not necessarily. And I'll talk about why in a minute. But from the Alliance standpoint, it is a real big disappointment. Obviously, we're not going to have any more games to talk about. We're gonna move. The sports world will move on. I'm not going to shed any tears for the Alliance, and other people will move on to other things. But as I said, that's not necessarily going to be a good thing for the XFL. I guess from the standpoint of the Alliance, there's really nothing else that can be added for now. I will say that as a business study, I look forward, I'm hoping, if anyone is a journalist who does business type books, I would love to get the behind the scenes story on this someday. I'd love to read that book. That would really be interesting. Or a documentary or anything. Maybe Charlie Ebersol can produce it. It can be, this was the AAF. It'll be a follow-up to his XFL one. So let me talk about the other league. So this is the OG version. This isn't the new one. I do have something from the new one as well. The truth is, spring football conceptually, I am interested in it. So I want to make it clear that while I am very disappointed in the Alliance, and obviously I was interested in it, I'll watch the new version of the XFL. So this is the new version of it. So there's your new logo. Now, I to be honest, I prefer the old one. But I'll explain in a minute why I don't think that this outcome is necessarily going to be beneficial for this league. Another thing I'll also say is that, so about the cap, so this is for the Dallas team, Dallas team in 2020, so there you go. By the way, this hat's really cheap. Vince, you gotta do a little better than that. That's, at least it wasn't expensive. But anyway, the truth is this. It's not necessarily a boon for the XFL. Reason why I say that. Yes, there's less competition now. One of your potential competitors is out of the way. Great. But number one, you've made you're making these splashy moves as far as getting like Bob Stoops to be part of the Dallas team. Like you've got these name coaches and, executives and all that. But the truth is, I feel like the football infrastructure in the Alliance was better. What I will say advantage-wise, and that goes back to, this version of the XFL era. The truth is, the XFL has one thing going for it that I will say that the Alliance didn't have. When Tom Dundon took over, he came in as a savior, and the truth is, we were all hopeful that he would show the patience that he claimed that he was going to show. And I'm not putting words in his mouth. When he made the $250 million commitment, the idea was that this was supposed to be for multiple seasons. They were supposed to be playing a long game. Now, you can criticize Charlie Ebersol and Bill Polian for taking a gamble and risking it. In the end, their reliance on Tom Dundon kind of to save them was their undoing. Because Tom Dundon is the one who kind of picked them up and then put them back down and then let the whole thing fall apart. Again, it was his decision. But once they sold the majority stake to him, it was his to do with as he pleased. Now, you could argue, why would somebody spend $70 million of their own money and then drop the thing before you actually had the opportunity to really monetize it and turn it into something? That's an answer. That's a question for Tom Dundon to answer. I can't do that. As far as the XFL is concerned, one thing that the XFL will not have a problem with necessarily is quote-unquote stable ownership in that Vince McMahon is stubborn enough that he would probably hang in there. And also financially, they shouldn't have a problem out of the gate. The reason I can say that, and again, I'll cite articles where I can there, the initial startup of it, where Vince McMahon started up the league, was off of $100 million that he made in selling some of his WWE stock. Now, the truth is, Vince McMahon owns the majority of WWE still, and $100 million worth of stock isn't actually that much. So he has this resource, kind of this personal piggy bank from this company he built, along with his family and others. But this company that he's built, this behemoth now, that has become its own money-generating bonanza. Based on that, he can kind of pull some money out of the piggy bank when he needs to, and he's done that. In the last couple of days, so that $100 million was the startup capital to get I believe it's called Alpha Entertainment, so I was sold this, and I paid my money to Alpha Entertainment, and I bought a mug as well for the Dallas team, so we'll see them in 2020. But But that's Alpha Entertainment. That's the parent company that owns the XFL. They're using a similar model in the terms of the league owns all the teams. And we'll talk about more of the XFL once we get closer to it. But I'll explain the contrast with the Alliance. So $100 million in startup capital, which is a pretty good sum in order to get things off the ground. And then recently, in recent days, he sold another $270 million worth of WWE stock, approximately. Again, I'll cite the article right here. But that potentially leaves him with a fairly large war chest, by comparison. So now you think you've got a very determined individual. They haven't started playing yet. So you've got a very determined individual who potentially can reach back and get even more funds if that's what's required. He doesn't necessarily need to have external investors. So that's an advantage. You have one stable investor who owns the league, who is going to be committed, because you don't bring back the XFL. And I'll explain, like I said, why. I'm kind of concerned for this league. At the same time, the Alliance thing isn't necessarily going to help them with this. You have somebody who's determined kind of to prove himself after the mistake that was the first league. And the first league is going to have that initial stigma. The truth is, you can rebrand and change the logo. I showed you the difference between that football and the hat. You can change the logo. It's the same name. This league has already failed once. That's just a fact. So now you're trying to fight that legacy. Now, the difference is that the first time around, it failed because the television partners dropped their support. They didn't have TV anymore. Well, with the new one, obviously this can change, but right now there is no television for this new product. Now, they're not starting play until 2020, but as we get into the end of the spring here, into the summer, heading into the fall, we're going to get close to 2020 sooner or later. So at some point, they're going to have to announce either a television or a streaming deal. I don't know if they're going to put games on the WWE network, which would be a very strange place, but I suppose you could. He owns it. But whatever he ends up doing, I don't know if there's going to be a taste. And this is why I say the Alliance folding or discontinuing operations isn't necessarily a good thing. And I'll tell you why. You basically poisoned the water again. The XFL was almost 20 years ago. So enough time has gone by where, again, I don't know resurrecting a failed brand is necessarily the best idea. But if you're going to do it, at least having nearly 20 years of separation, a little bit of nostalgia, maybe people can kind of forget the things that went wrong with it the first time. The football actually wasn't any good. The Alliance wasn't up to NFL caliber, but you had real coaches, you had people that were working into it, and the players, as you went on and played more games, the games did improve in certain aspects and quality. And your quality is only going to be as good as your player base. So even if you take the Alliance players, what makes you think you're going to be able to put on a better football product? So that's kind of something you have to keep in mind. And again, you've got no television deal. Well, from the first XFL experience, I don't think NBC would be interested because they got burned the first time. So when the XFL had gigantic ratings in the first week and then fell like a stone, the Alliance, by contrast, had decent ratings in the first week, and then it fell, logically, as you went into, but you also had it on the NFL network. You had it on these other networks that don't have necessarily as much reach. So you expected the ratings to fall. And now we're in March Madness, so the ratings were going to fall a little more. But they didn't fall like a stone to the same degree. It wasn't like they went from up here to down here. They went from here to then this is the network, the NFL network once, and then right now they're hovering right around here. It was basically like that. It was still pretty close, and the truth is, as interest would have built up, I actually think they would have done okay going back to the CBS network for the playoffs and then for the championship game. But they've foregone all that. So I don't think CBS is going to be interested because they just got burned by a league because their principal, the investor of the league, basically ditched them. They're not going to be thrilled having to now fill up that television time where they had programming slotted and now they have to find something else to replace it. So CBS has just been burned a little bit. NBC probably still has a bad taste of its mouth from it in the first place. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to Fox? Maybe. That's a possibility because Fox, I believe, is now a partner with WWE. They're going to be taking over, I think, the SmackDown show. Because Raw, I think, is still going to be on USA for now, I believe. And then you're going to have... I believe SmackDown on Fox. They're going to have one of the shows on Fox. So maybe Fox is interested, but that's what I mean. Like you're running out of options as far as like network television. And again, if you go to a streaming platform, that could work, but you're also going to have a more limited audience. So again, you're not necessarily gaining it. And then there's the third aspect of it. You're going to have some fans that got burned. They were fans, like the enthusiasm for the league was there. You can argue, oh, well, it wasn't so big. Well, because a lot of people don't want to be early adopters. A lot of people would much rather now, today, be sitting there telling everybody, oh, I told you so, it was never going to work. Well, to be honest with you, there's a real possibility that in the first year, the XFL will lose money. There's a very real possibility. No matter who tries to start a league right now, they will likely lose money in the first year. So the truth is, you have to get past the first year and show you that you're viable, show that you're strong enough financially to weather that storm. You know, stay on television, get eyeballs in front of the product, get sponsors and other people to buy into your product. They're not going to buy into it on day one. They're going to expect you to, you're basically going to have to prove a negative because they're all going to assume you're going to fail. So you're going to basically have to prove to them that you can weather that initial storm in order to even have a chance to succeed. You almost have to make it up as you go. You have to fake it until you make it. Because at first, you're not going to succeed. The ratings might be okay in week one, but they're going to drop off. Your job is to control it, where the original XFL fell like a stone ratings-wise. And I watched most, if not all, the games in the initial XFL season. So I speak from experience. There weren't a lot of us. And this was kind of in the pre-Twitter, YouTube era. It wasn't the same as today. Today we can have videos like this talking about it, which indirectly creates, buzz or advertising for the league. That can happen. But back then you didn't have that. The truth is, I don't know if in 2019 or 2020, the XFL is really any better position. And the reason I use this is, and I'll use this example here because it applies since it's Vince McMahon. Back in the early 2000s, when his main competitor for WWE, WCW, was in financial straits and AOL Time Warner decided they were going to get out of the wrestling business, they ended up selling the company to Vince McMahon for effectively pennies on the dollar. So the thought process was, if you were Vince McMahon at that time, you bought out your main competition. Now it was just you. You were the biggest show in town. You were the main show in town. The logic would say, oh, well, even at the very end, as much as WCW had sunk and sunk and sunk, you still had a couple of million people tuning in onto the show every Monday night that was competing with Monday Night Raw for the WWE. So the idea is, okay, so we'll take WWE's ratings, and then we'll add WCW's ratings, and that'll be the rating for the one show. And the truth is, that never materialized. Some of those people went away and just never came back. They weren't interested in the WWE product. So the fact that the only product left was WWE didn't make them any more inclined or interested. The Alliance of American Football's appeal was that it gave the potential for a different audience that wasn't necessarily an NFL audience. The XFL is going to have to try to appeal to that same audience. But now the question is there going to be enough? Are they even going to get the same ratings that the Alliance did? That's the question, because I don't think that's necessarily locked in. It's not a guarantee. So if the NFL fans who treat it as a minor league, who aren't interested in it, aren't going to watch, and a bunch of people who are just expecting it to fail aren't going to watch, and then the Alliance fans right now in the Alliance cities who feel burned that their league didn't even get to finish its first season, you look at, you can argue, oh, there weren't that many fans. Well, what little there was, the only possibility for it to grow was for it to last long enough for it to grow. So fans in Orlando who were watching a team that was playoff bound, fans in Birmingham whose team was playoff bound, and these other markets where these teams were at least starting to get a little bit of traction, even if the attendances weren't huge. In San Antonio, they had tremendous attendance considering that it was a new league. They cleared 30,000 fans in a couple of the games. Are they going to automatically go to the Dallas team? I don't know about that. Maybe, but it's hard to say. The fans who did attend games at the Alamo Dome, if they enjoyed themselves, they might have gotten a taste for a professional football product that wasn't available there before. But the team in Dallas may not satiate that. There's already a team in Dallas. There's also a team in Houston. You got the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans. If they're not satiated by that and they weren't watching those games, what makes you think they're going to watch the Dallas XFL team? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But that's what I mean. It's not a guarantee. You can't lock it in. So that's really the crux of it. It's two parts. On the one hand, disappointment with Tom Dundon's decision. And I think it was hasty in terms of, I don't think he's ever going to recuperate the money that he's already invested in it. Now, you could argue, don't throw more money after you've already kind of wasted some. But then you should have gotten into that business in the first place. If I was someone who was going to potentially do business with Tom Dundon, I would hesitate. If for no other reason, you've demonstrated no ability to stick it out. And your commitments aren't any good. So you talk the big game, and in the end, you're the one who faltered, because at the end of the day, Tom Dundon had the option, if he had elected to keep things going, finish the first season, and he could have still folded the league at the end of year one. That was always an option. But he decided to do it now, and the truth is, we'll never know what could have come out of the alliance. Now, is there a possibility that some angel investor could come out of nowhere and fall out of the sky right now and save it? Sure, but I'm kind of doubtful at this 11th hour, because it literally is the 11th hour. And restarting something that you're just in the process of shutting down would be very awkward, I would think. And I don't know if Tom Dundon would even sell it. I'm not sure. At the end of the day, it's going to be very interesting to see, because, as I said, it isn't going to automatically transfer over to the new league. Having another league with a similar premise in similar cities, some different cities, obviously, having another league isn't necessarily going to be, the boon. Who will the television partners be? The one good side, like I said, is that theoretically, the financial situation should be settled. If Vince needs more money, he can always sell more WWE stock. The question is going to be how stubborn he's going to be. I would expect that there's going to be enough stubbornness. I think he'll make it through the end of the first season. The question is going to be where that is going into 2021 and beyond. So those are my thoughts. Purely speculation on my part, but we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on and watching. So we welcome any thoughts and comments from you. What do you think about the alliance folding? Are you going to be watching? If you did watch, are you then going to tune in to the new version of the XFL? Is that going to be interesting for you? Do you think it's going to come to the same fate? Are they going to be able to make it longer? And the truth is, and maybe the better question is, do you even think that the spring football model is viable considering the upfront costs and the ongoing costs? Can anybody actually make a go of it? Is it enough to have television? Is it enough to have some early fan base? Can anyone weather the storm and actually build a brand? That's really what it comes down to. So we welcome any comments you might have. We'd love to hear from you. And if you get a chance, since you're here, if you could check out the rest of the channel, we have a podcast that we do every week, and we're going to be talking about this topic this weekend, certainly. It's the content gods have spoken, and this is what we have to do. So we're definitely going to be talking about that, but we also talk about, baseball and other sports leagues. We'll probably talk about the CFL when we get into the summer. We'll look at the prospects of the XFL as we get closer to it. And you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's Unnecessary Nonsense Podcast. And occasionally, if a story warrants it, I'll get in front of the camera like this, and we'll record a video. So, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.